we could start off with you just giving me an overview of, well, the Coal Industry Day and what your session focused on and what it is exactly that you discussed.
The specifics of the conference was focusing on the coal industry in South Africa, both thermal coal used for electricity generation and cement production, as well as to a certain degree metallurgical coal used in steel production. And the overall aim of the conference was to provide a platform for exchange, to provide a platform where industry players can interact with each other. And this extends to both mining companies, but also to research bodies, to governmental bodies, to ultimately get together and discuss and debate where is coal heading, and what challenges is the coal industry facing, and then also what are the opportunities to solve those challenges and to address them.
Your session specifically focused on the future of coal mining or mining in general. So, I mean, what in your view or your perspective does the future for global mining in general and its recovery look like post COVID-19? I mean, I understand you discussed a few potential different scenarios in your presentation. Could you briefly touch on those for me, please?
Absolutely, very happy to. And there, I would say COVID was one of the events that impacted mining together with the entire world. It's not the not the only event or not the only trend. And specifically for coal mining, there is the element around decarbonization, environmental concerns. But maybe first touching on this COVID aspect. Because what we've seen that with COVID, there was an impact on the demand side of commodities, including coal, given that economic activity was slowed down, in instances came to a halt. And that's the demand side of the equation. There was also an impact on the mining industry on the supply side of the equation, either because there were governmental requirements to slow down the work, to reduce capacities or even stop it, or companies made the individual decisions, either because of health concerns for their employees or because their own supply chains were disrupted. And I think those elements are, if you look at the broader scheme of things, something that is rather short term, that is substantial, but that is rather short term. So thinking about economic activity that is already getting back into movement, and there I would say once COVID has disappeared, and hopefully this will happen soon, those activities also go back to normal. There is another element of this which might be structural changes. I think COVID in a lot of cases on the demand side for commodities might imply lasting changes. So an example could be, it could be an accelerator for an increased different ways of working. People have learned that it's possible to work from home, as we're doing right now. And this is something that actually to a certain degree might stick, which then in turn implies that the need and the demand for office space, the demand for transport, and this is both car transport, this is this airport, might be impacted, which then in its final consequence also has implications for the need for commodities. Now, that's the COVID side. If we think about this in overall terms and specifically relevant for a coal perspective, coal is facing issues from a carbon decarbonization perspective. And I think it's an undisputed fact as of today, maybe except for a very few critical minds, but a generally accepted fact that burning of coal, and be it for purposes of cement production or also, and that's the bigger magnitude, for power generation, that this is releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, which is contributing to global warming. And hence the global trend to move away from fossil fuels and specifically from coal into renewable energy. And I think this is the tension that thermal coal is being stuck in. And the tension is coming from that thermal coal is a contributor to global warming. At the same time, it's a very substantial source for electricity production, which ultimately is the fundament for economic development. And I think specifically for South Africa, load shedding is something that is in everybody's mind. And switching off coal generation from today to tomorrow is just not feasible. At least not if we don't want to bear the economic consequences of basically industrial activity coming to a hard stop. So I think looking at the alternatives, and there is a push for renewable energy to complement the baseload generation from coal, and that's photovoltaic, that's wind, to a certain degree it's hydro, biofuels to a lesser degree, that those renewables are growing in their relevance. I think there's no doubt. At the same time, I'm also convinced that in order to ensure the baseload coverage, coal will be needed for power generation for quite some time. And we are talking here about years and years. Even if you look at the integrated resource plan that was released for South Africa, even in those assumptions, there is not a hard stop or a rapid decline for coal. The share is declining, but overall, with an increasing demand for electricity, it's pretty much that over the next 10 years, the demand for coal is seen as reasonably stable. So there is no, from my perspective and from I think the majority of industry participants, there is not an expectation of a rapid decline of coal. Now, you were talking about the scenarios, and this is going back to a global perspective. I think no one knows what the future will look like in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now. So it wouldn't be credible to make exact predictions. What, however, can be done is indeed thinking scenarios and saying what are actually the drivers that influence the future. And I think two key drivers, or you can think about this in axis. One key driver is the economic development as a direct influencer, how much electricity is required, and there with coal. And another driver, which speaks to the fundamental changes that are happening, basically the transition speed of fossil fuels into renewables, also speaking to what will happen with global supply chains. And now, if you think about those two axes, they're actually spanning an area of 4 scenarios, where you have a world that is slowing down in economic activity, where, however, at the same time, fossil fuels remain the dominant source. And then you have the opposite, where there is substantial increase in economic activity, and there is an acceleration in the transition into renewables. Now, if you develop and calculate those scenarios, I think there are 2 observations. One key observation is, even in the extreme scenarios where you have a sluggish economy and where you have a more rapid transition into renewables, even there, the global coal demand, if you look at a 5-year horizon, is expected to just decline by 6 or 7%, which is in absolute terms quite a lot. I mean, we're talking about, give or take, 400 million tons here. But it actually is not, it's not 30%, it's not 50%. And I think the second message is that in most scenarios, there is a slight decline, however. So this basically means coal companies need to be ready to go into a competition where ultimately they need to ensure that they can position their production on the market, and the more efficient this production is from a cost perspective, the better positioned those companies are to basically be in the race for as long as possible.
You mentioned the decline in coal. While it's not as big as what it could have been, it's still quite significant. I mean, especially with coal being such a big market player for South Africa specifically. I mean, you mentioned load shedding as an unfortunate consequence. I mean, how would you say South Africa can actually reposition itself for the future.
Mm-hmm. And there, I think I mean, I'm actually not trying to say that the coal industry has caused load shedding. It's more an electricity generation problem. But you are absolutely right in saying the coal industry is a substantial contributor to the economy. It carries a lot of jobs. I think that's around, if you look at the numbers, 80,000 direct employment, plus all the indirect employment, which typically comes at a factor of 2 to 3 times. I think if you look at the short term, the decline for the coal industry, or the development of the coal industry, depends on the one hand of what is happening from a domestic consumption, so for electricity production, for cement production, for steel production, but then also from exports. And I think the export side, there a crucial element is, do the volumes that are being put into the market, do they stay cost competitive? And I think so, that for a large degree. Now, if you're looking at the longer term, there is an array of things that can be done from a mining industry perspective, but also from a government perspective and from the broader ecosystem of mining. Just thinking about, I mentioned it before, what matters is cost competitiveness and thereby efficiency. And a contributor to this is obviously investment, and it's obviously the application of technology. So that's an area where mining companies really need to look at in order to stay competitive. Then the investment part, I mean, if you look on the attractiveness opinion of South Africa as a mining market, it's really, really low. And this is partially driven by facts. Given, for example, the uncertainty in the mining charter, it is a charter, it is not written in law. It is also justified on a factual basis by the issues of electricity stability that is crucial for mining operations. There are socioeconomic elements that influence this, but there is a quite substantial degree of perception that is globally looking at South Africa, and just of the opinion it's not a good investment location. It's not the country where you would want to invest. And I think changing this perception, and yes, addressing the facts that are behind this, like the charter, like electricity, but especially addressing the perception behind this, will make a huge difference in the competitiveness of the mining industry.
I know you mentioned the socioeconomic challenges in the mining charter specifically. I mean, obviously those are things that we would need to look at or consider addressing in the long term in order to change that global perception of the South African investment case. But what are some other suggestions or things you think South Africa could do from a mining company perspective in order to actually encourage further investment into South Africa? I mean, obviously our current economic situation is not the best. I mean, and we need that investment to be able to improve that. So, I mean, this is sort of a vicious circle that we find ourselves in at the moment.
Yeah, it very much is, yeah. And I think here it's an element, partially it's a call to, and not coal in the terms of fossil fuel, but a call towards governmental stakeholders, but it's also called to the mining industry in itself. And maybe the combination of this is actually what is required, that the stakeholders, the interest bodies get together and formulate a plan. And I think elements of this plan, if you look at it from the highest level, there are actually 8 elements that come to it that contribute to this. We talked about one, which is about the legislatory framework, the mining charter. I think what can be done there is provide greater clarity and greater trust in the kind of like sustainability and reliability of the charter, or simply writing it into law. Because as a mining company, making investments is a 10, 20-year horizon. So that basically over this tenure, as a mining company, you have the confidence that whatever you planned with will remain in place. Then I think on the energy, electricity supply side, and the country already has made a step there by allowing electricity generation from renewables for self-consumption. I think the processes and the permitting steps can further be improved and further be eased. Also together with considerations, what can be done in terms of feed-in opportunities, and together with this, what is required on a grid side infrastructure, because there's actually interest from mining companies to invest into their own power generation, but there's the side of regulatory actions that needs to coincide with this. Then if you further think, there is an element around infrastructure, especially for bulk commodities, so talking about coal, talking about manganese, iron ore as well, to build and further develop those infrastructure elements. And this, I think, requires a very diligent study, because what one would want to avoid is to build overcapacities or capacities at the wrong connections. And here, I think, again, it's something that should be done in collaboration of the relevant parties.